I'm sure that you, at some point in your life, have been falsely accused of something. I have a joke involving this problem about a man who was having this challenge surface in his dreams when he went to sleep. He'd hear these accusing voices in his head all the time. So he went to the doctor, and the psychiatrist said, "How does this make you feel to be falsely accused all the time?" "Terrible," the man said. "So bad, doctor, I need your help in a big way. What should I do? I feel very suicidal." The doctor replied, "Well, before we go any further, you need to pay me in advance." I was watching an old video on a British made-for-television show, Upstairs, Downstairs, set in the early part of the last century when the upper classes lived above and the servants lived below. And in this particular episode, the Upstairs family had engaged a new servant girl who soon became unhappy, and that unhappiness came to the notice of the master of the house. In sympathy with her, he finally got out of her that she was pregnant, and after much duress, he got her to admit the name of the man who was the father of the child. The master confronted that man, and of course, the man denied it. And then he sued the master for falsely accusing him of being the father. See, in those days, there were no paternity tests. So the master went to his solicitor, who advised him that he'd been most unwise, and he advised the master to get the girl to sign a statement that she had lied about it. After much agonized thought, the master did so, due to possible loss of reputation and family considerations. Although he was blameless, the accusations and the publicity would probably sink his career. If he defended the servant girl, he'd be accused of more than a casual interest in the girl, for she was a servant, and why on earth would he care about a servant unless there was something else going on? All things considered, including the context, did the master do the right thing? Well, according to the law offices of Aaron Lawson, the publicity that results from a defamation lawsuit can create a greater audience for the false statements than they previously enjoyed. If the media pick up on the story of the lawsuit, false accusations that were only known to a few now become known to the entire community, nation, or even to the world. As the media is much more apt to cover a lawsuit than to cover its resolution, the net effect may be that large number of people who hear false allegations never learn how the litigation was resolved. In other words, the plaintiff may be required to expend a considerable amount of money to bring the action, may experience significant negative publicity, which repeats the false accusations, and if unsuccessful in the litigation, may cement into the public consciousness the belief that defamatory accusations were true. You know, frequently malicious people who accuse others of wrongdoing know that all they have to do is make the allegation and accusations, and that'll be enough. Whether they're true or not does not matter all that much. Look at these political ads that are put on the TV from across the border at the moment as I say these words to you. The damage to the person's reputation is going to be done anyway. A public defender friend of mine once said to me, I used to say when I heard that someone was charged with a crime that they must be guilty. I've learned, she said, to ask now, what are the facts? You know, this problem of being accused is no new problem. In ancient Israel, one of the oldest books of the Bible, the book of Job, the problems associated with accusations are personified in the spiritual presence of the Satan. The Satan is seen as the accuser in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In the New Testament, he's called the accuser of the brethren. His prime weapon is discouragement, and that discouragement is used to achieve a sense of guilt. I had a grandmother who used to say to me, all discouragement comes from the devil. Let's notice this. Nowhere in any spiritual tradition is accusation seen as the work of God. Rather, God is frequently seen as the one who vindicates against false accusations, as in the passage that Alan read this morning. No weapon forged against you will prevail. You will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me, declares the Lord. Now, when St. Paul was on trial for his life, he was falsely accused by Alexander the coppersmith. And this is what he said about that. Alexander the coppersmith did me a great deal of harm. He violently opposed everything I said. At my first hearing, no one came into court to support me, but the Lord stood by me and lent me strength. The book of Ezra states that the rebuilding of Jerusalem was stopped by accusations made to Artaxerxes, the Persian king. The book of Daniel says that accusations were made against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace because of them. 5 accusations were made against Jesus Christ. Number 1, you violated the Sabbath. You threatened to destroy the Jewish temple. You used sorcery to exorcise demons. You claimed to be the Messiah. You claimed to be the King of the Jews. And Jesus remained silent most of the time, knowing that no matter what was said, it would be used against him anyway. But you say to me, what about your story of this servant girl? What do we do when more damage will be done by just trying to defend ourselves or others who are falsely accused? What then? Do we do nothing? Well, sometimes doing nothing is the best course. It's all we can do. But that, thank God, is not the end of the story. There are 2 sayings which reflect a spiritual reality about this problem of false accusations. We say, referring to this reality, what goes around comes around. And what that means to us is that the accuser, creates bad karma for themselves by their actions. And the Bible says, whatsoever a person sows, that shall they also reap. Spread a falsehood, and it will come back to bite you. There's another saying out as well. The truth will out. It may take some time, but count on it. If given half a chance, the truth will slip out somewhere and change everything. In history, the truth eventually shines out. Alexander the coppersmith has been almost entirely forgotten, except as an example of someone who falsely accused a great man. St. Paul will always be remembered as one of the world's greats, and Alexander the coppersmith as a man of no consequence. But if we have done something wrong, and a voice within us accuses us continually, what then? You and I might have done all we can to make restitution for something we've done. We may have been completely forgiven, but that doesn't seem to matter to this voice inside. We accuse ourselves and often hold ourselves to a higher standard than we do other people. And this can be on everyday levels as well. For the most minor offenses, we have difficulty forgiving ourselves. We tell ourselves that our work is poor. We should have done it better. If we are parents, we castigate ourselves for being too soft or too hard on our children. Perhaps we chewed out an employee for some infraction. Now we feel bad about it. Perhaps we've got a habit or addiction that we just can't break, and we tell ourselves that we're a failure. Whether we attribute this voice to our lower nature or to Satan doesn't much matter, because we're still defeated all the same. So what do we need to do about this? Number 1, stop listening to this accusing voice within us by understanding that the great God of all is our shield and defender, not our accuser. Secondly, let's change the frequency to positive and start to use affirmations. If we've made mistakes, the Bible in many places makes it very clear that there's a way back to God through repentance and forgiveness. Thirdly, ask God to forgive you. And if you have you then accepted that forgiveness, taken it into your soul, and found peace? Because if you haven't, and you're still very critical towards yourself, you're most likely to be very critical of other people as well. In fact, without realizing it, we can get into the accuser role. It's called transfer. There is, however, some good news. There's a whole other way of going forward. Jesus taught us not to judge. Judge not that thou be not judged. We're not to judge ourselves or other people. If God, our Creator, doesn't stand in the accuser's box, why are we there? It does us ourselves absolutely no good to put ourselves down or to condemn others. Fixing blame is always useless. Fix the problem instead. We all know, don't we, in our heart of hearts, that God doesn't give up on us. All of us are works in progress. We're allowed to make mistakes, learn from them, forgive ourselves, move forward into greater spiritual growth. And this is a process. But there's no need to get stuck living condemned in the process of becoming a better person. The Bible always teaches that God is merciful. Jesus said God brings his rain on the just and on the unjust. God accepts us the way we are, as the old hymn says, just as I am, I come. With God we can become more of who we really are. God made us, knows everything about us, so we cannot surprise God. God knows our strengths and weaknesses, and we're here on this planet to make our souls. And it's the journey that's important, not just the destination. And if we believe in ourselves and God and each other, we can empower ourselves, we can become better people, and more effective for the cause of goodness in the world. If we forgive ourselves, then we must also make a decision to stop listening to the accusing voices within. The moment we do, we can release abundant energy that's been wasted doing that and experience a new freedom. Here's how it can work. The great Mahatma Gandhi, one day as he was stepping aboard a train, one of his shoes slipped off and fell between the tracks as the train moved off. Instead of accusing himself of being a careless fool, Gandhi simply took off his other shoe and threw it as close as he could to the other one. Asked why on earth he did this, he said, "The poor man who finds a shoe lying between the tracks will now have a pair." When Jesus had someone brought in front of him accused of adultery, her accusers pressed their accusations against her. Jesus, however, remained silent. He was not there nodding. Finally, he was pressed for an answer. "Let the person without sin," he said, "cast the first stone." And the crowd melted away until there was only the woman left there standing. Jesus said to her, "Where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No, Master. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And she walked away free. The accusations died because, as St. Paul says, no one of us is in a position to condemn. When we condemn others, it's the pot calling the kettle black, or the leper condemning a fellow leper for being leprous. I want to close now with a very important story about a woman who dropped from her mind the accuser role in the most strange situation to ever conceive of doing that. If anyone's been connected with the U.S. prison system, they'll tell you the easiest thing in the world to do is to play the role of the accuser. When someone's in jail, it's all too easy to think that they're guilty and treat them like that. It's very, very hard not to be judgmental with people who are in prison. After all, they've been condemned by society. I remember on one day we brought a young man who had been accused of murder, had been in prison for 20 years. He didn't do it. And finally, my friend, well, I'm going to tell you what she said about this. She said, "Never condemn anybody. Look at the evidence. Look at the facts." You know, there are very few people in the U.S. prison system who don't go into judgment and instead care for the inmates. Let me tell you one such person, Catherine Laws, was the mother of 3 small children when her husband became the warden of Sing Sing. Everyone warned her from the beginning she'd never set foot within the prison walls. That didn't stop her. When the first prison basketball game was held, she walked into the gym with her 3 beautiful children and sat in the stands with the inmates. Her attitude was, "My husband and I are going to look after these men, and I believe they'll look after me. I don't have to worry." She insisted on getting acquainted with them and with their records. She discovered one convicted murderer was blind, so she insisted on visiting him. Holding his hand in hers, she said, "Do you read Braille?" "What's Braille?" he said. She taught him how to read, and years later he would weep tears of love for her. She found a deaf mute in the prison. She went to school to learn sign language so she could communicate with him. Many said Catherine Laws was the body of Jesus that came alive again in Sing Sing prison. Catherine was killed in a tragic car accident. The next morning, Warden Lewis Laws didn't come in to work. So the acting warden took his place. Instantly, the inmates knew something was up. Something was terribly wrong. Gradually, the word leaked out that Catherine was dead. The following day, her body was resting in a casket in her home, 3/4 of a mile from the prison gates. As the acting warden took his early morning walk, he was shocked to see a large crowd of the toughest, hardest-looking criminals gathered like a restless herd at the main gate of the prison. As he approached, however, he noticed tears and grief and sadness. He knew how much these men loved Catherine. He turned and faced the men and said, "All right, men, you can go and pay your respects. Just be sure that you check back in tonight." He then opened the gates, and a parade of criminals walked out without a guard, trudging in orderly file to the 3/4 of a mile to stand in line to pay their final respects to Catherine Laws. At nightfall, they were all checked back in, every last one of them. If we drop the accuser's role, if we stop listening to the voice of the accuser within, we will, I believe, become enlightened. We will become incredibly powerful people. As Marianne Williamson once famously wrote, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful. It's our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant and gorgeous and talented and fabulous? You know, you and I were meant to shine. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that's within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. As the old chorus says, Jesus bids us shine with a clear, pure light, like a little candle burning in the night. In this world of darkness, we must shine. You in your small corner, and I in mine. Thanks be to God.